Power, live from Washington, D.C.
From Bloomberg's Washington, D.C. studios to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew. Tonight, breaking Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency plunging below $63,000 today as days of selling only intensifies. Bitcoin erasing nearly half its value since its record high just 4 months ago. And Strategy, the world's biggest corporate holder of Bitcoin, out after the bell with a more than $12 billion net loss for the quarter. And big tech's big spend. Amazon topping them all with a $200 billion CAPEX estimate for this year. And that's pulling the stock lower in after-hours trading. We'll unpack Amazon's quarter as investors show some exhaustion over more spending. And that is where we begin with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick, who joins us right off the top with Power Moves, live from World Headquarters in New York. Romaine, Amazon.
Yeah, Amazon, kind of a repeat of what we saw yesterday with Alphabet. The core business is doing fine. And remember, at the core, this is basically a company in two parts. The e-commerce business, which is still the largest growth there, and Amazon Web Services, which is their cloud business. That's also doing well. However, of course, this company is spending a ton of money to build out its AI dream, so-called CAPEX spending, those capital expenditures. The street was looking for the company to spend about roughly $140-something billion this year. The company came out today and said it's going to spend $200 billion this year. Now, if they had given this number, I don't know, 3 months ago, 6 months ago, they likely would have been rewarded for it. But there's been so much scrutiny around how much money these companies are spending and what, at least to date, has been a lack of real return on that spending. And that seems to be giving investors a little bit of jitters here. There's going to be a lot of explaining needing to be done on the conference call, not so much about the short term, Joe, but about long term, when all of these bets starts to pay off. Again, $200 billion, even for a company of Amazon's size, is nothing to sneeze at. And that's why you're seeing the shares down 9% here in the after hours trade. And remember, that's been a big reason why we've seen this broad market sell-off over the past few days. A lot of folks dumping software stocks, dumping AI infrastructure stocks, saying that those valuations are way too high. And until those CEOs, Joe, can explain exactly when and how much those returns will be, some of those folks are willing to just sit on the sidelines.
Well, yeah, this has been a remarkable change in sentiment and a remarkable unwind, Romaine. We talked yesterday certainly about software. You mentioned Alphabet down another $2 today on that same issue, concerns about the spend. But that money would be going to NVIDIA, right? NVIDIA was down today. It would be going to Broadcom, which was barely positive today. How do we rationalize this moment, and when do we find a floor?
Well, you're right. I mean, this is something analysts have pointed out, is that money's going somewhere, so there are beneficiaries. But there's two big distinctions there, Joe. Is first of all, these are promises to spend. It's not like they've cut the check already. They've basically earmarked $200 billion. And I think what investors are skeptical about right now is how much of that gets spent, particularly if these companies keep being punished for actually making those commitments. And that's the real issue right now, Joe. This is really about just simple math. You put it on a spreadsheet. At some point, it's got to all even out, at least in the short term. Coming out of this earnings season, it's not evening out, Joe, and that's causing investors a little bit of concern.
I guess there is room for some winners here. You see McKesson with the Bafo quarter up 16% today, but you're watching Molina Healthcare, Romaine. This is a very different side of that coin. What's happening after hours? Yeah,
basically a Medicaid, Medicare provider, not a company you pay a whole lot of attention to. It's plunging more than 30% in the after hours trade. And this is all because of what's going on in Washington there. The big cutbacks that we've seen in Medicaid spending. The company basically saying it's actually going to pull out a Medicare Part D altogether for 2027. It gave guidance, Joe, of $5 per share for EPS for the year. The street was looking for about $13. So we're talking about, almost a third of what the street was looking for. That's unheard of. The company pulling its guidance. There's only really been two instances where we've seen the company do that and seen its shares plunge like that. Back in 2012, when there were some issues there about funding, particularly coming out of Texas, and then all the way back in 2005, when there were also issues with regards to whether Congress and, more importantly, the White House would continue to back that continued spend on Medicare and Medicaid.
Power Moves with Bloomberg's Romaine Bostick. Romaine, thank you so much for meeting us in another after-hours session here. The relentless selling today, pulling Bitcoin, another big story, below $63,000. to its lowest level in about 15 months, making a round trip to President Trump's election in November of 24 and erasing nearly half of its value since peaking some 4 months ago. Bitcoin just now regaining that $63,000 level, but it has been a doozy for investors. And joining us now with his insights, a real expert on this, Tim Stenovec is host of Bloomberg Business Week Daily and also the Crypto Show on Bloomberg TV. Tim, how do we make sense of losses on this level when a chart is broken like this? How do you explain the unwind?
Well, a lot of the unwind, well, first of all, it's tough to actually talk about fundamentals at all with Bitcoin and moves because there are no actual fundamentals. There are no cash flows. There are no earnings reports. So if you look at a historic day, such as what we saw in the last 24-hour period with a 13% decline, a lot of that has to do with traders unwinding their levered bets on Bitcoin. So when they fall to a certain level, they're forced to sell to hit margin, and then it turns into this relentless cycle. This has happened before, but the scale in the past was different, Joe. I mean, we've seen 70% declines in Bitcoin. We've seen 70% declines in Bitcoin 2 other times before, in fact, but the scale wasn't as big because this wasn't an asset class that was, $2 trillion at the time. Now that market cap down to $1.25 trillion with the unwind that we've seen just in the last few months.
Crisis of faith, I believe, is how Paul Krugman described this on your program a little while ago. Let's let our audience in on what he had to say on Bloomberg Business Week Daily.
A lot of people sold Bitcoin as being the next gold, and it turns out that in the face of doubts about stability, doubts about politics, the next gold turns out to be gold, not Bitcoin. I think it's a big wake up for people that maybe this isn't actually going to be an enduring asset. So, it's really, really hard. If you ask when people make price forecasts for Bitcoin, I always wonder on what basis.
Yeah.
It's not like you could do a price earnings ratio on this thing because there's no earnings, no services. It's all just pure faith. But it does feel like we're seeing a real crisis of faith right now.
Tim, is that crisis of faith among retail investors, or is it, in fact, among the institutional investors that were supposed to mainstream crypto?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, I think the institutional investors are still really optimistic about this. And that's a big difference than what we've seen in previous crashes or previous declines, Joe, previous so-called crypto winters, is you didn't have, spot Bitcoin ETFs then. You didn't have the buy-in from Wall Street. So it remains to be seen whether they remain optimistic. But if you look at Bitcoin's short history, there have been drawdowns like this in the past. I do want to go back to what Paul Krugman told us on the program a little earlier. And what he said about this idea of this being digital gold or not being digital gold, I think that's the real difference with this unwind, Joe, with this decline, is that in the past, the correlations have been more associated with risk-off moves that have been cross assets, so an equity market decline, or maybe the collapse of FTX, for example. Wider moves that have caused this. This is just happening sort of in a vacuum. Yeah, we're seeing some selling in some software stocks and some sort of riskier areas of the market, but gold is close to all-time highs right now. So this identity crisis that we're seeing with what Bitcoin is and what Bitcoin wants to be, we don't really know that at this point.
Helping us with some badly needed context. Tim, thank you. It's great to have you with us.
Thanks, Joe.
Tim Stenovec, live on Balance of Power. Joining us now with his insights into this and a lot more, Democratic Congressman Gregory Meeks of New York, senior member of the House Financial Services Committee, ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Congressman, it's great to see you. Thank you for joining. If you could keep your Fin Services hat on for just one moment here, I'd love your insights on what's happening in the crypto space right now, because many Democratic lawmakers are voicing concerns about the attempt to regulate with a market structure bill known as the Clarity Act. Do you need to see additional ethics provisions when it comes to crypto to warm up to this idea? What does this price destruction today do to the charge of regulating the crypto space?
Well, look, I think that we've got to have and make sure that the appropriate regulations are in place so that people are safe. And I think that what we want to make sure also that there is not any individual, ethics violations or anything of that nature, as we are focused on, with members of Congress and others who are elected. And so I think that with the Clarity Act, we need to be clear and have those regulations in place, which would affect and take in consideration everyone.
This creates a new urgency, it sounds like, to pass that legislation. Will that happen this year?
I think it's possible. I think that if we work collectively, and I think that it should make sense. You know, we're talking about now to make sure that there's transparency with reference to every member of Congress, with reference to not having any advantages in the markets and things of that nature. And I think that should be also extended with crypto, and it should include not only members of Congress, but even the President of the United States.
I know you had quite the interaction with the Treasury Secretary this week. Congressman, I'd like to bring, if we could, our listeners and viewers into the hearing room. This was Financial Services and the Treasury Secretary. When you had quite the back and forth here, I had trouble understanding what everybody was saying at a certain point. If we could play that, let's watch and listen.
Will you halt it and do a complete investigation and scrutiny of this licensing application? All you have to ask is yes or no.
No, Congressman.
All you have to ask is yes or no.
The OCC is an independent entity, and I would know, Congressman.
I take that as a no. Stop covering for the president. Don't be a flunky. Work for the American people.
Mr. Meeks, trip to Venezuela.
Work for the American people. Don't be a cover-up for a mob.
A cover-up for a mob. I think just for the sake of our radio listeners, you were calling him a flunky there. Congressman, did you hear what you needed to from Scott Bessent yesterday? Do you believe he's covering up for the president?
Yeah, all I asked him was a simple yes or no question. There was 8 seconds left. He had 5 minutes to ask a question. There was 8 seconds left. And so I was asking, will he just hold up, investigate, and look at it prior to agreeing to have it move on? That's all. And he could have said yes or no. The 8 seconds would have expired, and that would have been it. Mm-hmm. But he couldn't say yes or no. So you have to make the presumption that he's saying that he will not scrutinize this deal because he could have easily said yes. I mean, national security is at risk when you have, and it's clear, the president's son getting close to $400 million while the president is negotiating a deal with the UAE. Let's check to make sure that our national security is not at risk, number one, and that, there's this illegal gain that the Trump administration or the Trump family and his friends seem to be getting at every deal that is done.
You're referring to a Wall Street Journal report that lieutenants to the so-called spy sheik of Abu Dhabi made a $500 million investment to get a 49% stake in World Liberty Financial. This is the Trump-linked crypto company. That was 4 days before the inauguration. Congressman, if Democrats retake the House in the fall, will you hold hearings into this?
Absolutely. I think that, we absolutely we should be holding hearings now. It shouldn't be a Democrat and a Republican issue. It should be an issue for the United States Congress, who are a separate but equal branch of government. And our job is to have oversight of the executive branch. We should do that now.
I want to ask you about some new demands that we're hearing from Democratic leaders in the House and the Senate, and a letter that I have here from Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. This was addressed to the Republican leadership in the House and Senate with changes to ICE enforcement that would lead to an unlocking of funding beyond next week for the Department of Homeland Security's. They include a ban on masks, a requirement that agents identify themselves, no racial profiling, new use of force standards. These are among the 10. We heard a reaction to this from the press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, at the White House. Congressman, here's what she said.
The president is never going to waver in his commitment to allow immigration enforcement efforts in this country and to support ICE and Border Patrol and the deportation of illegal alien criminals. I know Senator Schumer and Leader Jeffries sent over a very long list of demands, some of which the administration is willing to discuss. Others don't seem like they are grounded in any common sense, and they are non-starters for this administration.
assuming that she does speak for the president in this case, he had suggested that the ICE would be taking a softer touch, I think was the language he used in Minneapolis. Katie Britt on Twitter, Democrats' newest proposal is a ridiculous Christmas list of demands for the press, saying that this is not negotiating in good faith. Congressman, it sounds like we might be shutting down Homeland Security again next week. What do you think?
Well, it does. It sounds like that to me. If, in fact, they're not listening to the American people. We look at where the American people stand right now with what they see ICE doing. Over 60% of the American people want that to stop. Over 60% of the American people don't want American citizens executed in the streets, as we've seen in Minnesota. They don't want individuals who have never committed a crime just picked up by men in masks and thrown into a van and taken away. They don't want subpoenas that's issued not by a judge. These are all things that the American people are asking for. And I think that you can see, and I think that that's Democrats and Republicans that identify who the ICE agent is, as you can in any police officer. These are just reasonable things based upon, basically rights that we see in the Constitution. So
We've had any number of Republican lawmakers on the air this week. Congressman John Cornyn called this an insult, the idea of forcing agents to demask. Ted Cruz thought it was outrageous when we asked him about it last evening. Is this where negotiations break down?
Well, I guess so. How is it horrendous for them to unmask? You don't see FBI agents mask. You don't see local police officers mask. You don't see any other law enforcement mask. In fact, they all generally have name tags also. So how is this an insult? How this is, it only makes common sense. The only time that I've seen something that you're talking about with people masked, wearing no names or anything else, it's Gestapo-like. We've seen that. That's not who we are. It's Russian-like. It's Vladimir Putin-like. It's China, Xi-like. It's like other governments, authoritarian governments do things like that, not the United States of America.
Congressman, I have to ask you before you leave us, from your post as ranking member on foreign affairs, if you have any optimism over the talks that we'll be conducting with Iran tomorrow in Oman, if you think a diplomatic solution is more likely than military strikes, which the president continues to threaten.
Well, I hope that I'm always for diplomacy first. And, the president, has all this, has the ships there, et cetera. But diplomacy should always work. My concern, though, is who is the diplomats that are performing and working on diplomacy. It seems as though in every instance, it's only two people, and none of them are from the State Department. It's Witkoff and Jared Kushner. None of them are diplomats. None of them know what to negotiate. They are real estate negotiators and cutting deals all over the place. So I would hope and would wish, but it seems as though that the president has hollowed out the State Department, hollowed out trained individuals, ambassadors, et cetera, and now have left amateurs to be there to try to negotiate. We can see their failure to do that thus far, failure to do it in Russia and Ukraine. So that is what my main concern is right now.
Could you see strikes happening this weekend?
No, I think that, again, that there's no authorization for the president to strike.
Of course.
If, in fact, he intends to strike, he should come back to Congress first and ask for either a War Powers Act or an authorization to utilize military force. He should come to Congress. That is our responsibility to make the determination of whether or not there should be a strike. And the president has the obligation to bring the reasons he wants to strike to Congress first.
Congressman, let's keep talking about this. Democrat Gregory Meeks of New York, it's good to have you back, sir, on Bloomberg. We thank you. Coming up, President Trump says he's done a hell of a lot of good, telling the National Prayer Breakfast today why he might make it to heaven. He had a lot to get off his chest. Jeff Mason is standing by to help us unpack it all next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio.
I won't qualify. I'm not going to make it to heaven. I really think I probably should make it. I mean, I'm not a perfect candidate, but I did a hell of a lot of good for perfect people. You know, Mike Johnson's a very religious person. God is watching over him. I don't know about me, so I hang around with him because I feel I'm protected a little bit. Scriptures always tell us that blessed are the pure in heart. I don't know if that applies to me necessarily. I'm not so sure. I don't know, Paula, does that apply to me? I'm not sure.
Is this why he's up all night? It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington, where we heard from the president this morning, the National Prayer Breakfast, musing about, well, yeah, his chances of making it into heaven. In a 77-minute freewheeling speech, the president hailing the success of his immigration policy, called at least one Republican lawmaker a moron, and defended DHS Secretary Kristi Noem before attempting to bless her on the stage. Let's bring in Bloomberg's Jeff Mason, who has spent years in the White House press corps following the president's movements on this morning's speech. It's great to have you back.
Great to be here.
What do we make of his, this is not the first time he's done this routine, his obsession with his own mortality?
Yeah. First of all, I've covered a bunch of prayer breakfasts, and I think it's important to note that a 77-minute speech by a president of the United States is also very unusual.
At that hour?
At that hour, at that venue. But it's not unusual for President Trump, who's been giving speeches, long speeches like that at virtually all of the events that he's been doing lately. So, A, that's unusual. B, yeah, I mean, he's definitely thinking about his own mortality. He's certainly thinking about his legacy, which is kind of defining a lot of what he's doing at the White House right now.
I mean, he's not known as being a religious person, despite some of his claims for having an affinity for the Bible and so forth. You wonder who he's talking to that's getting his mind into this place. You remember the Bill Clinton tears begging for forgiveness at that same event many years ago in the Lewinsky scandal? This is a different shade, isn't it?
Totally different era. And I think you're right. He's not known for being religious, although he has a lot of support from the religious right.
Sure, yeah.
And he's done things before, like holding up the Bible in front of a church during, in I guess that would have been 2020. I thought it was interesting, some of the things that he sort of admitted. Like he kind of indicated that maybe he doesn't read the Bible or hadn't ever read the Bible by suggesting, maybe these people supported me or would support me even though I haven't done these things. He didn't go out and say that specifically. It was kind of a third person type construction, but I thought that was interesting.
He's got an interesting weekend ahead, Super Bowl weekend. He's not going to this game, and he's been doing a lot of sporting events, certainly in his first year back in office. Big party at Mar-a-Lago. I can only imagine the invite list. Is that what we have?
I think that's the plan. Yeah, we'll be celebrating there and watching there. He did go to the Super Bowl last year. I was on that trip, and it was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Although there was,
imagine the security.
I think the security is massive anyway, but particularly when the president of the United States.
So there's an alternate halftime show.
Yes.
And the president, well, I guess we'll have to find out. Caroline Leavitt was asked today whether the halftime show would be Bad Bunny or Kid Rock at Mar-a-Lago. We didn't get an answer.
We did, actually. She said, well, I think she said it would be no big surprise if he chooses Kid Rock.
It might depend on what TV you're looking at.
I think he's more of a Kid Rock guy.
I agree. Yeah. This is going to be wild to watch this, by the way, with Jeff's help. It's great having you back.
Thank you, sir.
Jeff Mason with us on Balance of Power. Coming up to the president. Would the White House sue the Fed chair? Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent would not rule it out before the Senate Banking Committee. Of course, the DOJ is already investigating Jay Powell. What that could mean for future policy next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for joining us. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent returned to the Capitol for a second day of testimony, another grilling, this time appearing before the Senate Banking Committee and the very members who will end up confirming the next Fed chair. Bloomberg's Washington correspondent Tyler Kendall has been tracking the day's events for us and filed this report from the Hill earlier.
Well, Joe, this marked the second day of congressional testimony for the Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, yesterday in front of House Financial Services and today in front of Senate Banking. Yesterday's hearing was quite contentious, and today's hearing had its moments as well. In one notable exchange, the secretary told Senator Elizabeth Warren, the ranking member on this committee, it would be up to the president to decide whether a potential Fed chair Kevin Warsh could be criminally investigated if he doesn't drop rates. Yesterday, Bessent declined to express a view on whether President Trump has the authority to fire a member of the Federal Reserve Board over a policy disagreement, telling lawmakers he's not a lawyer and doesn't have an opinion on the matter, though going on to say, of course, he views the Fed as an independent agency. The Fed has been front and center today in front of the Senate Banking Committee since this is the first stop for Kevin Warsh's nomination before it can be approved and sent over to the full Senate floor for a vote. I asked Senator Thom Tillis earlier today if he has eased up at all on his position that he will block the nomination until a criminal investigation into the current Fed chair Jerome Powell is resolved.
With respect to the nomination, this is a binary scenario. When the investigation is done, I will do the introduction for Mr. Warsh on the next chairmanship. Until the investigation is done, I will oppose any board confirmation.
Joe, in one notable development earlier this week, the chair of this committee, Senator Tim Scott, said that he did not think Fed Chair Jerome Powell committed a crime during his testimony to this very committee last year that is currently under investigation by the Department of Justice.
Tyler Kendall on Capitol Hill joining us now with more insights into the hearing. Bloomberg's Treasury reporter Dan Flatley spent quite a bit of time in hearing rooms the last 2 days. Dan, it's great to have you with us. This was an interesting exercise for the Treasury Secretary. Maybe you can explain a little bit about why he was there, because they covered a range of issues, and he showed up for a fight, Dan. He even brought Oppo research on some of the members of these committees.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. So, it's interesting. He sits at the table in front of the committee. Yesterday, it was the House Financial Services Committee. Today, Senate Banking, and he has a binder with him and a yellow legal pad. And yesterday, he had some sparkling water. Today, he had just regular water. So he has his materials there, and he does have some what appears to be some opposition research. Yesterday I saw him looking. You had Representative Meeks on earlier. Secretary Bessent referred to his notes when he was speaking with Mr. Meeks, and then came back with some retorts there. So yeah, he comes prepared. He's known for doing that. He's always very thorough.
What kind of news did we make, if any? I mean, I guess the job was sort of to not make news today, but a lot of talk about the Fed, questions, as Tyler just pointed out, by Senator Elizabeth Warren about whether the president would sue Kevin Warsh, essentially, like we're seeing DOJ right now with Jay Powell, if he didn't cut rates. Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. So, Senator Warren today, as you said, asked Secretary Bessent, would the president sue Kevin Warsh, were he the Fed chairman, if he refused to lower rates to the president's liking? And Secretary Bessent said it's up to the president. He did later say it's a joke, and he also made a joke about you, Senator Warren, if you care to hear it, and he sort of repeated it, and we moved on from there. But he was also pressed on the Fed yesterday at House Financial Services, and what's most interesting was when Tyler spoke with Senator Tillis earlier, he also entered into the record today a list of names of senators who did not believe that Powell perjured himself or committed any kind of criminal offense during his testimony last year. So you really see Republicans in particular coalescing around this idea that Powell didn't do anything wrong, or he at least didn't do anything criminal, and let's just kind of move on from all of this. But the president does not seem inclined to do that at this point. So we're really kind of approaching this standoff here. Well, why don't you climb into the president's brain with us here and listen to what he said to NBC News in an interview about the incoming Fed chair and whether there was an arrangement, an expectation, or a promise that he cut rates for being hired. Let's listen.
Does your new Fed pick understand that you want him to lower interest rates?
Oh, I think he does, but I think he wants to anyway. I mean, if he came in and said, I want to raise them,
if he said that, he wouldn't have gotten the job.
He would not have gotten the job, no.
So we know what's happening at his first meeting?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think that the president, as he often does, is using a bit of shorthand there. What Secretary Bessent has said all along is that he's looking for a candidate who has some kind of imagination about what the economy is capable of doing? Can we have non-inflationary growth? Can AI and productivity and all of this sort of thing lead to a scenario in which you can cut rates as the economy is growing, which is not always the scenario? I think the president is sort of cutting through all of that and basically saying, I want lower rates. And no, I wasn't going to hire somebody who explicitly said that they weren't on board with that or suggested that they might want to raise rates. But as to what will happen in the first meeting of the FOMC, I think that's a real toss-up right now because, as you know, Joe, the chair has to convince or try to convince all the members of that board to come to some sort of agreement or at least some consensus on what to do with interest rates. So I'm not sure that Kevin Warsh, even irrespective of whatever he might have told the president, is going to be able to make that case right off the bat. He may be able to, but there's still a lot of things to kind of sort out before that.
Well, we'll be finding out together. Thanks for bringing your decoder ring on the president, Dan. Bloomberg's Dan Flatley covering Treasury for us out of Washington. We turn overseas now, where Starlink terminals used by the Russian military to provide satellite internet on the battlefield have been shut down, according to an advisor to Ukraine's defense minister. Bloomberg News reporting that as Russia has lost its access to Starlink, the Ukraine military continues to use the satellites, though they have faced some issues as well. Today's Starlink shutdown for Russia coming just days after Kyiv notified Elon Musk's SpaceX that some of its satellites were being used by Russia. Vladimir Putin has been pounding Ukraine's cities in air raids using drones and missiles in recent weeks, striking heating and power facilities as freezing temperatures take hold. The attacks taking place as Ukrainian, Russian, and American delegations meet for another round of talks in Abu Dhabi. Joining us now with their analysis into all this, Becca Wasser, defense lead for Bloomberg Economics, and Wayne Sanders, Colonel Wayne Sanders, senior defense research analyst for Bloomberg Intelligence. It's great to see both of you. Becca, give me your sense of this moment that we're in.
Well, right now, I think we're seeing that there have been continued Russian attacks on very key Ukrainian positions, military positions along the front line, but also so many attacks on civilians far away from where the front lines are. And Starlink has been incredibly important during this conflict. Ukraine has used it to be able to use it to see what they refer to as certain points of interest that have been provided initially by the U.S. military, as well as some European intelligence services, to be able to prosecute their defense against Russian aggression. But we've seen how Russia has been able to essentially use Starlink more recently to be able to carry out some of its longer-range drone attacks into these civilian areas. And so right now, what we've really seen from Ukraine is trying to pull back on that and reduce some of the pummeling that they are getting, particularly on its energy infrastructure at such a critical juncture in time.
So, Colonel, what led to the Starlink outage here for Russia? Was this an Elon Musk decision, and does this give Ukraine the upper hand as Vladimir Putin tries to use the cold as a weapon?
Yeah, I think it very well could. I mean, when you look at the way that this is all set up, the timing always kind of goes into this, right? Classification is something that's going to play a part in this, and it's going to come in and say, hey, I can't exactly tell you. But when you really look at where this is, energy infrastructure, I think that Becca brought up is critical to this, especially after some of the Russia-Ukraine talks. There was an increase in attacks right then at energy infrastructures, trying to gain additional leverage by Russia. So the fact that this happened, I do not think that this is a coincidence. I do think this is potentially tied into U.S. relations with Elon Musk and with Starlink, Starshield, and being able to see. This is also one of the key pieces that comes into play when you're dealing with a commercial provider and not just a direct, national military communications network as well.
Yeah, that's an incredible thing to consider. To that end, does Russia have alternatives here, if not Elon Musk?
Russia has alternatives, but for the most part, they're delightfully old school.
Yeah.
We're talking radios. We're talking fiber optic cables. We're talking sometimes even just line of sight. And that means that there's going to be a reduced range for some of their attacks potentially, which means maybe some civilian populations will be more protected, but it does not mean that these attacks are going to cease. There's always a way to innovate, and there's always a way to continue to carry out these attacks.
What's the best way for Ukraine, Colonel, to seize on this situation that we're in right now with Russia potentially on the back foot and peace talks underway? How does it strengthen its hand at the table by way of the battlefield?
Yeah, I would look for center of gravity analysis plays a really big part into this. Where is the place that you can actually hit a target and have the most impact? Everybody does it. Everybody looks for where those weaknesses are. And this is one of those times where they would want to strike at those centers of gravity right now. And they would also then look for, as Becca's saying, I would also then start to target some of what I think would be the alternative communication means necessary. So if it is on those radio towers, anything, though, that can tie to valuable military targets also then keeps Ukraine on the right side of the political will here. Making sure that they're not going to do anything that would harm, obviously they're not going to do anything to their own infrastructure, but anything that's going to lead to the long-term ties back to Russia, those communication lines are something that's going to be very vulnerable right now.
Okay. I want to pull you both into Iran for our remaining couple of moments here. Becca, there are important talks tomorrow that will be taking place in Oman. Do you have any reason to be optimistic here with the flotilla off the coast? Does that change the dynamic this time around?
I am most certainly not optimistic.
Really?
And I think some of that is because of the firepower that we've seen massed in the region at this point in time. We've also seen Iran engage in some risky behavior, whether that is an attempt to seize a U.S. flagged tanker or whether that is having a drone buzz near the U.S. carrier in the Middle East. But the truth is, both sides entered into these negotiations not really clear what the negotiations are on. Iran has insisted that these negotiations are only about its nuclear program. The United States insists that it's about its nuclear program, its conventional missile network, about its regional proxy network, as well as the ongoing protests in Iran. So there's a mismatch in what they're even coming to the table to discuss, and that means that expectations are surely not going to be met.
We remember this a bit from Venezuela as the levels of justification were evolving. Colonel, what do you expect when you park the USS Lincoln off the coast here with eyes on Iran and Tehran decides to send a drone at the boat? Does that give you a sense of how this ends? Is that an act of war?
I mean, it could be considered that, but I don't really think that the U.S. is looking at it in that. I think what they're really doing is they're trying to figure out, they're probing defenses and trying to see what the political will is and the military will of the United States, who's proven themselves multiple times against Iran regime, even in the last 6 months. So when I really look at that, I agree with Becca about the missile arsenal, and I think that's one of the key pieces. And the reason why President Trump parked it out there specifically is to address that, because Iran still has the largest military arsenal in the Middle East, and they can strike across the region in that. And given their nuclear ambitions, so even if you bring it back to the nuclear front, those nuclear ambitions still allow the missile arsenal that they have can project power. It can threaten U.S. partners in the region. It can also be adapted for nuclear delivery. So these are things that they have to take seriously, and that's why you see another carrier strike group sitting there.
Great analysis from Becca Wasser of Bloomberg Economics and retired Army Colonel Wayne Sanders, Bloomberg Intelligence. Thank you both, as ever. Coming up, how the midterm elections are working their way into football's biggest weekend. It's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. It's Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. Thanks for being with us. We'll have a lot more on today's top stories when we assemble our political panel up next. First, the stories we're watching in today's Power Brief. This weekend's Super Bowl will feature ads for more than pickup trucks and beer. Republican Senator Susan Collins of Maine, in fact, is making an 8-figure ad buy to run a 30-second ad you're seeing now on Bloomberg TV, highlighting her support for first responders, the first to do so here on a national broadcast that drew more than 127 million viewers last year. Most of them do not live in the state of Maine. In a more targeted move, though, Texas Democrat James Talarico is spending 6 figures on a 30-second spot Super Bowl that will only run in the Houston media market. There he is. The ad, which Talarico already put online, calls for new taxes on the ultra-wealthy as he looks to defeat Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett for the Democratic nomination for U.S. Senate. Guess we'll have more than Clydesdales to watch. Former Vice President Kamala Harris is launching a new campaign project just in time for this year's midterm elections. The former Democratic presidential nominee has received her former Kamala HQ social media account, rebranding it into a Gen Z-focused campaign content hub aimed at mobilizing young voters. Former Veep social accounts all now bear the name Headquarters. Harris, in a video posted to the account, said it's where young voters could go to get the latest, stay engaged. And Democrats in Virginia announcing their state's redistricting map that would potentially gain 4 House seats in the Commonwealth. The agreement, if approved by voters, would potentially leave Republicans representing only one of the state's 11 House districts, with Democratic leaders casting the map as fulfilling a promise to voters in the state's election and countering the president's efforts to shore up Republican control of the House through redistricting in Republican-leaning states like Texas. Virginia's proposed map comes one day after the Supreme Court ruled to allow California redistricting. That would also benefit Democrats to stand. Joining us now with their reaction to everything we've been talking about this hour, this evening's political panel, we've got a good one. Jim Kessler, Democratic strategist, Executive Vice President for Policy at Third Way, joined by Republican strategist Sarah Chamberlain, the President, CEO of the Republican Main Street Partnership. It's great to see you both. Redistricting won't matter if the government's not open, and I guess I need to start there because we're in the throes of another raging debate over the funding for ICE and Homeland Security, having just reopened the government following this debate. A letter went out today, Sarah, from Democrats, Hakeem Jeffries and your former boss, Chuck Schumer, to the Republican leadership with 10 demands. One of the big ones is no masks. Another one is identification. They go on to include training and many of the other provisions that we've been talking about. Katie Britt calls it a Christmas list of ridiculous proportions. Are we shutting down again the department next week?
No, I think the last minute will come to some type of compromise. I mean, as you saw in the House, 7 Democrats did join the Republicans to fund it. So I think the Democrats will have to come over and fund. I think the Republicans are going to negotiate on some of it. We already have started. Obviously, there'll be body cams. They're going to be de-escalation training now. And President Trump has pulled out about 700 ICE agents from Minnesota. So, we're starting to get there. And he admitted on Tuesday night in the ABC interview that maybe it was a softer touch. A softer touch. So we're getting there. But, the Democrats have to meet us halfway or the government will shut down. But I do think we're good. Well, I think last minute.
Really? Okay.
I do. Last minute, I think.
I was going to save your crystal ball to the end. So there's optimism.
There is optimism.
This is good. We've talked to a number of Republicans the last couple of days who've made clear, Mr. Kessler, that these are all non-starters. You know several of them. And why don't we start with Ted Cruz, who joined us just last evening with his take on these potential reforms. Listen.
The reason that ICE agents are having to wear masks is because the left is deliberately doxing them. They are targeting them. If they find out their identities, they are sending violent protesters to their homes. They are threatening their families.
We've got them using body cams for their operations right now. I think that's a bipartisan idea.
These ICE agents are being targeted by some of the anti-ICE instigators, and I think in some instances their identity should be protected. But this is just, to me, just a ridiculous request.
A ridiculous request that Mr. Cornyn also called an insult to these agents' professionalism. This sounds like we're an ocean apart here. What happens next week?
Well, I do think we're going to have a shutdown.
You do?
I think it's going to be a mini shutdown because we've funded most of the rest of the government. I don't know how long it'll last. I think Senator Katie Britt will be part of those negotiations from Alabama. She's a good-faith negotiator and a conduit in between Democrats and Republicans. I don't believe the Democratic demands are outrageous demands. They're very, very normal demands. Like you'd look at this list and you're like, this isn't happening already. And I also think, look, there's a Kristi Noem problem, okay, that the president needs to cast her aside. She is not capable of doing this job. She is a media-addicted political hack. Wow. They should have a professional at the top. I think there needs to be kind of something major beyond what the president has already done with Tom Homan in Minnesota and withdrawing, some of the troops there. But there needs to be something more.
Well, of course, if this happens, we're reminded by Republicans frequently that ICE has lots of money from the big, beautiful bill. And what will actually be shut down here is the TSA and FEMA. So how long does that go on for before this? We remember what happened when the airports were shut down.
Absolutely. And the Democrats are not going to want to go through that again.
Is that what keeps this from being a long shutdown?
That's my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's why I think if we shut down, and I still don't think we will at the last minute, but if we do, it'll be short term. I mean, you go to the airport, nobody wants to wait in line for hours. And FEMA, with all the snow and the ice, and I mean, FEMA needs to be active as well. So I think the Democrats will realize that in an election year especially, you do not want to not fund FEMA and TSA.
How long can Chuck Schumer play that game for if we're in a world where TSA agents aren't getting paid? This is very recent memory for people.
He can play it for a long time.
Yeah?
Yeah, he can play it for a long... Look, he took criticism for the deal that we got, a week ago that... opened the government. And look, it was a good deal. It was a Democratic win, no doubt about it. He got half of his caucus, but, he took some heat on that, too. When there is a deal, and I agree with you, there will be a deal at some point, he will take heat for that then. He will not take heat if the government is shut down.
Boy, that's really something. What does Mike Johnson need to do in the next couple of days here to try to prevent that from happening?
I think he just sits back and lets the Senate try to negotiate through it.
So this is Schumer and Trump. This is not all the leaders on Capitol Hill.
Right. I think it's
together.
Schumer and Trump trying to figure it out. But if I'm, as a Republican, the longer the lines are in TSA, the better we're going to do in November.
And Sarah starts making more TV ads.
Exactly. Because you cannot do this to people. And FEMA, look where we have had snow in the past month. We're still living with it here. You can't not have FEMA funded and ready to go. You cannot have them shut down. That, too, will be a win for the Republicans.
Well, I don't think TSA lines in February are going to affect votes in November.
I know. You will if there's enough commercials about it.
Well, we'll see.
How about Bitcoin in February? Does that impact the midterms next November?
Well, Bitcoin's had a very, very rough...
I should say so, but it's directly associated with this administration.
Yeah, and look, I think part of it that's associated with this administration is the corruption here. So, one of the things that you could see Democrats talking about is the massive corruption and double dealing. It's not being heard right now because cost of living and ICE are really the top issues, but I do think that's an undercard issue here.
Well, Gregory Meeks certainly went there. Does an ethics debate derail the Clarity Act?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
I don't think
so.
I'm polling. We're doing a lot of polling now. Obviously, it's that time of the election cycle. People, they don't own Bitcoin. They don't care about Bitcoin. Most of them don't even understand Bitcoin. But what they do care about is feeding their families and making sure the groceries are cheaper.
Well, we could argue that Bitcoin is more affordable today. Sarah Chamberlain and Jim Kessler, great to have you back. Great conversation. Thank you. And check out the Washington Edition newsletter. You've got a lot to catch up on, from Bitcoin to earnings to politics. Find it on the terminal and online. And thanks for joining us on Balance of Power. I'll see you back here tomorrow on Bloomberg TV and radio.